Teshe Delay, and welcome to the Awam Tibetan Buddhist Institute. I'm glad to have you here for our Sunday meditation hour this morning and our Dharma talk, which we're continuing with the preliminary practices, or Nundro as it's called in Tibetan. And so we began on the first page actually doing the Nundro practices, so it helps set the stage for the Dharma talk that we'll do shortly. But we'd like to invite the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas to join us through sounding the conch. So if you don't have a copy of the text, you can always get one from our website at awaminstitute.org and go to the resources page, and you can download it from there. So we began on page 1 and we did the conch, so we start with the blessing mantra. Om Sambara Sambara Bhimanasara Mahasambhava Humpet Soha. Om Sambara Sambara Bhimanasara Mahasambhava Humpet Soha. Om Sambara Sambara Bhimanasara Mahasambhava Humpet Soha. Homage to Samittabhadra and Samittabhadri, because I suffer due to my own actions, and I now have this precious human life without knowing when I will die. I will now engage in virtuous actions for the benefit of all sentient beings with joy and devotion. Therefore, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain enlightenment. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain enlightenment. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, in order to enable all sentient beings to attain enlightenment. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. And may they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. May all mother sentient beings, boundless as the sky, have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. And may they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion. Vajrasattva purification. Vajrasattva and Vajratopa appear above me, purifying me and all beings and phenomena with nectar from the place of their union. We chant the 100-syllable mantra at the top of the next page. Om Benzasato Samaya Manupalaya Benzasato Tenopa Tishtadrido Me Bawa Sutokayo Me Bawa Supokayo Me Bawa Anurakto Me Bawa Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Sutta Me Titam Shri Yakuru Hom Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Kaita Benze Mame Mansam Benze Bawa Mahasamaya Sato Om Benzasato Samaya Manupalaya Benzasato Tenopa Tishtadrido Me Bawa Sutokayo Me Bawa Supokayo Me Bawa Anurakto Me Bawa Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Sutta Me Sittam Shriya Kuru Hum Ha 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 Ho Bhagavan Sarva Tata Gata Benze Mame Munsam Benze Bawa Mahasamaya Sato Om Benza Sato Samaya Manupalaya Benza Sato Tenopa Tishtadrido Me Bawa Sutokayo Me Bawa Supokayo Me Bawa Nirato Me Bawa Sarva Siddhi Me Prayata Sarva Karma Sutta Me Titam Shriya Kuru Hong Ha 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 Ho Bhagavam Sawe Tata Gata Benze Mame Merta Benze Bawa Maha Samaya Sato Mantala offering. Om Hom. In the Dharmakaya pure realm, Dharmadhatu equality, the realms of the five Sambhogakaya families self-appear unobstructedly, along with the array of Nirmanakaya pure realms that fill all of space. All this I offer as Samatavajra's clouds of great bliss. Om Ratna Mandala Puja Mega Samudra Saparana Samaya Hom. Short 7-limb prayer. Whatever merit I have gathered through prostrations, offering, confessions, rejoicing, requesting, and praying for the sake of the enlightenment of all sentient beings, all this I dedicate. Home. In the northwest of the land of Oregon, in the heart of the lotus flower, endowed with the most marvelous attainments, you are renowned as a lotus born, surrounded by many hosted dakinis. Following in your footsteps, I pray to you, come and bless me with your grace. Home. Home. In the northwest of the land of Oregon, in the heart of a lotus flower, endowed with the most marvelous attainments, you are renowned as a lotus born, surrounded by many hosted dakinis. Following in your footsteps, I pray to you, come and bless me with your grace. Guru Pema Siddhi Home. Home. In the northwest of the land of Oregon, in the heart of a lotus flower, endowed with the most marvelous attainments, you are renowned as a lotus born, surrounded by many hosted dakinis. Following in your footsteps, I pray to you, come and bless me with your grace. Pema Siddhi Home. In the mantra, Om Hom Benza Guru Pema Siddhi Home. 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 Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. Om Ahum is a girl up in the city home. And we continue at the top of page 3. Light radiates from the Guru's 4 places into my 4 places, purifying my body, speech, mind, and all subtle obscurations, granting the 4 empowerments and planting the 4 seeds. The Guru dissolves into light and merges inseparably into myself. So we dissolve the visualization, just rest in the natural state of pure awareness. If any distractions, thoughts, and so forth arise, just let them go and refocus your attention. So you'll meditate for about 5 minutes. So now we do our Dharma talk for today. And as I said at the beginning, we are continuing the talk looking at the preliminary practices, or the Nundro, as it's often referred to in the Tibetan. And last time we did the first part of that. We talked a little bit about the conch shell and that part, the blessing mantra. That is, neither of those are actually part of the preliminary practices per se, but they're in the prayer book, so I wanted to mention those. And then the preliminary practices have two main parts. One is the common Nundro, and the other is the uncommon Nundro. The common Nundro is also called the four thoughts that turn the mind, and so we talked about those. And so if you want to follow along, and you have a copy of the practice manual that we just did, you can follow along with where we are. And so within the four thoughts that turn the mind, first there's the homage to Samattabhadra and Samattabhadri, but then it says, because I suffer, and so that was the first of the four. And then due to my own actions, which refers to karma, so that's the second one of the four. And then we continue on with, and now I have this precious human life, which is the third one in the list. Sometimes these are put in slightly different orders, but this is the way it is in the version that we have in our prayer book. And then also, without knowing when I will die. So those two things go together. Now, we finished talking about precious human life last time, so now we go into the other. We live, we have a life, but inevitably we die as a part of that. Life is uncertain, and so we need to be aware of that. Now, the whole purpose of these uncommon nindras is to give us some incentive or motivation for doing the practice, to help us so that we can improve, we can achieve, ideally, enlightenment or liberation, or one of the other words that are often used for that kind of a state. So life is uncertain, it changes. We know neither when or how we will die. I oftentimes tell a story about Anne, my partner, when she was a therapist, or is still a therapist, but she was doing a clinic with a bunch of people who were cancer survivors. And they all thought they were going to die of cancer. Understandable how you might think that. During the break at lunchtime, one of them actually collapsed and died with a heart attack. All of a sudden, they realized they might die from something else. We just don't know when it'll happen or why it'll happen. We could have an accident. We could have a heart attack. We could have COVID or something like that. There's all kinds of things that could happen. And so just being aware of that. Because part of what happens is we have a tendency to put things off. Okay, so, okay, yeah, I'm interested in that. I'd like to do it, but, maybe after I retire, or maybe this, maybe that. We come up with all kinds of excuses. The point here is we need to really think about doing it now, because we may not have that opportunity later in our life. And so this adds an element of urgency to this opportunity that we have with this precious human life. That's the idea behind this. Some will postpone it later, but we have a variety of reasons for doing that, but we never know when that time is going to arise. And so that's the main point here. Now, each of these different aspects are said to be a contemplation. So we are to spend some time doing that. Now, you may remember the teachings that Jigme Lodro Rinpoche gave for us on the 100-day Nundro retreat. And that focused primarily on these. And so he wrote a book on that, the 100-day Nundro retreat. That's available on Amazon if you want to see that, or if you were at the teachings, you may have some notes or something on how he described doing that. And it was based primarily on the root text for the Nyingma tradition of these things, which is by Patrul Rinpoche on oops, no, I'm thinking the wrong thing. Sorry, what's the title? The Word's My Perfect Teacher. There, came to me. So, so it's based primarily on that book, and so it has a lot of information in it as well. And we cover it in our Essentials of Tibetan Buddhism class in a fair amount of detail as well. So then we go on to the next thing here, for the benefit of all beings. And so that comes, it starts in the Pali tradition. It's not particularly emphasized in the tradition like Theravada, but it is in the Pali tradition, and in the Mahayana that became a much more important aspect of the tradition. And that carried over into Tibetan Buddhism, which is sometimes considered to be Mahayana as well. And so that became a very important thing to do for the benefit of all beings. So we're not just trying to achieve enlightenment for ourselves. We're trying to do that not only for ourselves, we're not ignoring ourselves, of course, but also for all beings. Okay? It's an altruistic intent that we want all beings to do that. And so in this case, it says the benefit of all beings, but in some cases it refers specifically to sentient beings. What is a sentient being? Well, in the East, a sentient being means somebody or some being, not necessarily a person, that has a sense of consciousness, that is capable of differentiating between happiness and unhappiness. It's hard to know if an insect can do that, okay? So we don't know exactly how each of these individual groups of beings, other than humans, react to things. Some mammals in particular can seem to be happy or unhappy about things. That's fairly noticeable, but other kinds of things, it's not always so clear. So basically, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition and in Buddhism generally, it's any being, life form of a being that is visible. Insects, things that we can actually physically see, we assume that those are qualified as sentient beings. And that means that we have to treat all of those beings with loving kindness and compassion. Okay? So we have to take that into consideration. So we're doing this for the benefit of all beings. I had an episode I've told you about having done this before, but it happened to me again where we had a flock of flies in our house. Apparently a mommy fly got in that was pregnant, and all of a sudden we started having flies. There was over 20, 25 flies, something like that. So I had to capture them one by one and release them outside. And so that's part of what we try to do, is we try not to kill these beings as best we can. There are cases, excuse me, where that becomes untenable, let's say, where the particular insects, and the case that comes to mind is there was a center back east which bought this house to use for their Dharma center, and after they bought it and they were getting in, they discovered that it was infested with roaches. Not a good thing. And so they're talking to their lama and saying, well, what do we do? We're not supposed to kill these things, but we can't use this for our Dharma. And so what they settled on was doing some special prayers for them, some special rituals for them, and then they had the exterminator come and get rid of them. So there are cases when things like that have to happen. But the general rule is that we don't want to kill that. We want all beings to have happiness and not have suffering, okay, as a part of that. And so that brings up the idea of different ethical guidelines. And for lay practitioners like ourselves, there are 5 basic principles that the Buddha used. He didn't come up with these. These were traditional. You find them in all kinds of traditions, cultures, religions around the world. So they are not unique to Buddhism. And so the first one of those is what I was just talking about. Do not kill. The second one is do not steal, or sometimes it's translated as do not take what is not given. Slightly different meaning, but basically the same. The third one is no sexual conduct, which basically refers to adultery, but also can include other kinds of things such as someone who's underage or someone who is protected, which is a term used in India for someone who is engaged or someone underage, and things like that. So you're not to have sex with somebody like that. But it's also been extended to include things that are covered by law in various countries. And so, for example, it would include things like rape and abuse and harassment and so forth would be a part of that. The fourth one is do not lie. Okay? And then the fifth one, the last one, comes out in different variations. It appears that the earliest one said alcohol, do not drink alcohol. But it's also translated as no intoxication, which would be a little bit broader, so that would include other kinds of drugs, for example. And yes, they did do drugs in India in those days. But later on, it actually appears that it may have been transformed more broadly even to greed. Okay? So, and that, of course, is one of the core tenets of the Buddha when it came to the 3 poisons. The earliest version of the 3 poisons included greed. And so trying to avoid that. And now we know it more commonly in our tradition as one of the 6 poisons. But it's still there. And it's one of the primary sources, that attachment and seeking and going after things, grasping at things, clinging to things, and so forth. And so it's one of those core things that can result in our human suffering. So anyway, those are the basic 5, but they're not treated as hard and fast rules. The example that I gave with the roaches would be one, but they're treated more as guidelines in Buddhism. And so there are just so many possible variations of a rule like that, and rigid rules tend to result in more of those kind of issues ethically as we go through that. And so it depends on the situation of what the right thing, the good thing might be, and what not to do as well. And so a little bit of flexibility can come in handy in terms of how to go about doing these things, but it can also be used as an abuse. Okay? When we look at things, doing things, then we begin to make excuses. Well, I don't really have to do that. I can just do this anyway because it doesn't say I have to do it in this particular way. So sometimes it can be a little difficult to know what really is the right thing to do. But one of the guidelines that the Buddha gave in terms of this was that relating it back to the idea of karma. Karma means actions. We're talking about actions here. And specifically, it refers to intentional actions. Okay? And so that is one of the key points in terms of the actions that we take, is are we doing it intentionally, or was it perhaps an accident, or something we misunderstood the circumstances, or there's all kinds of possibilities there. But it's also possible to just use it as an excuse to say, I can do this, I don't have to do that. It just says, I can do that if I want to do that. That's not what it says, okay? So we have to be careful about that and not use it to try and rationalize our behavior as a part of that. One example of the do not kill is some of you know Cliff Leftwich, who's a member of our Sangha and one of our founders. And Cliff was doing a long retreat in Tibet and was bitten by a rabid dog. And he wanted to have the dog put down to overcome its suffering. But the Lama that he was with said, no, you don't know what that dog's karma is. You should let that burn up. Whatever negative karma is causing this illness, just let it burn up, and you'll suffer, but you will have dealt with it. You'll be done with it. Otherwise, it could come back in another life. Well, that is one of the approaches, just let it burn up. But that raises questions about the bodhisattva approach to things. If we have compassion for all of these beings, shouldn't we be acting with compassion toward them? Is it allowing somebody to really suffer like that the opposite of what we're talking about when we talk about the bodhisattva path? And so, you can go either way with it, and that's one of the challenges we sometimes face with the texts in Buddhism, because we see things that talk about both of those directions. Well, in this particular case, I read where the Dalai Lama said, in a very similar kind of case to the one that Cliff was facing, that he thought it was better to be compassionate toward the being. And so it was okay if some being is really suffering in that way, to go ahead and put them to sleep. And so there are those two views. We never know for sure. I tend to lean with the view of the Dalai Lama on that. But you could certainly make excuses or reasons, let's say, not excuses, for doing it in the other way. So when you can, you want to avoid that. So catch and release for little insects in your house, those kind of things are one thing that can be helpful as a part of that. What sometimes happens in the process of doing that, you may injure one of them. One of the flies got caught a little bit, and so it was injured a little bit in the process of trying to catch it and then release it. And so I did a mantra for it. Okay, Om Mani Padme Hum. And so you can do that kind of thing, because accidents happen. It certainly wasn't my intention that would happen, but those kind of things can happen. Or maybe you even kill something in the process, not intentionally, but you do. You could do POA. Now, I'm not going to talk about POA as a practice, but there are practices that can be done in cases like that as well. Poa means transference of consciousness associated with somebody or some being who has died. So the second one on the list was do not steal, or don't take something that is not given to you. I always wondered, does that mean if you find a $5 bill on the sidewalk that you shouldn't take it because it wasn't given to you? I'm not real sure about that one. I can't give you a definitive answer on that one. But basically the idea is do not steal. And so it's pretty self-explanatory. I'm not going to give much of an explanation of this. But it is particularly egregious to take something from a Dharma center. So if you decide, oh, I like that Tonka, and you walk out the door with it, that's really bad. To take anything from a Dharma center is considered to be a particularly negative effect on your karma. The next one, the no sexual misconduct, is also pretty straightforward, especially with the examples that I gave there. But it does have some complications in particularly Tibetan Buddhism because of sexual yoga. Okay? When sexual yoga became incorporated into the Buddhist path, if you will, it's not in all of the different versions, but it's in certain versions of that, that raised some questions. That happened around between the 5th and 6th centuries CE. But monastics take vows of celibacy, and there are lots of rules about sex related to monastics in the Vinaya, the rules for monastic practitioners. But sex is a really powerful force. It's really driving to sustain our existence. Without anybody having sex, we don't have much time left, okay? So it is something that is essential to the continuity of not only human existence, but everything else. It has to happen in order to be able to do that. But even for monastics, it can be a very difficult thing sometimes to control. In fact, there are more rules about sex in the Vinaya than anything else. Okay? So every time a problem came up, they would set a new rule. They would come to the Buddha, he would say, this is the new rule, and add a rule to it along with a little explanation about that. But most lay practitioners don't take vows of celibacy. Okay? So that in itself is not the issue. So it is important, though, within that guideline of not abusing others in any way. And that includes the adultery that I mentioned as a part of that, as well as the rape, the underage, the engaged women or men. Any kind of abuse or harassment are generally considered to fit in that category. The next one is do not lie. That's also pretty straightforward. But the Buddha did not say you have to tell or confess, which is kind of interesting. You just don't tell a lie as a part of that. But there is an exception to that too. In the Vinaya, for the monastics, they have to confess. If they break a rule, there is a period. In most cases, there is a specific day or a weekend or something as a part of a retreat where everybody that has broken a rule confesses to the Sangha that they have broken that rule and make a commitment not to do that again. But that doesn't apply necessarily to us. And there are several hundred rules, depending on the tradition and the specific Vinaya that they are following. There's about 230 some rules. There's more for women than for men, interestingly enough. And so there's a lot of rules that they are taught to have to follow as a part of that. And if they break any of them, they are supposed to confess those. The last one then, no intoxication, I mentioned, was in some cases no alcohol. This was an ancient tradition. This is something, as I said, the Buddha concocted or made up or came up with. It was around for a long time before him. He just took it and used it as a guideline. And so alcohol may have been one of those earlier ones. And as I said, no intoxication, and then eventually no greed. There's actually in the Vinaya commentary on this, there's a comment about it meaning no greed. So there is evidence that the Buddha did that. Although it's another one of those things. The Vinaya itself was modified over time. And so is some evidence that some of those rules in there came after the Buddha had already passed on. So we don't know for sure. We just have to accept what we have as a part of that. Okay. So those are the main things. So if we go on from that in the text here for the four thoughts that turn the mind, then it goes on to say, with joy and devotion. Okay? So there's actually two parts of that. There's the joy part. This should be a feeling that we are doing something that is right or good. It doesn't mean that we're exorbitantly joyful in that kind of a sense, but more of a peaceful joy that we have, knowing that we are following those, that we have good intentions as in terms of what we are doing, that we are, and the other part of it is we're making a strong commitment to doing these things. And that's one of the reasons that these practices are often done on a daily basis. I'll talk more about that in just a moment. But we do them and remind ourselves that we're doing them because it is the right thing to do. We're making this commitment to follow these ethics to benefit others as a part of that. It can be challenging at times, particularly when we're going through the process of studying and learning all of them. And to do this with this sense of joy in our heart can make a big difference. We remind ourselves of that part. Sometimes we refer to this as altruistic intention, which means to do something good, beneficial to someone else without expecting anything in return. So it may make you feel good if you say give somebody's homeless, you give them some money, you might feel good about that, or you do something else. We collect things for the Sister Jose Center here in town, clothing, other kinds of things, and take them down there to help women who are either homeless or otherwise needing assistance. And so it can make you feel good to make donations of those kinds as a part of that. But the point here is, in terms of altruism, you would do it anyway because it's the right thing to do, whether you feel good about it or not. So we do those things, and they become a part of what we do it and why we do it. And then it transitions here and just simply says, therefore, ... a little ellipse there. And we go into the next section, which is the uncommon nundro. And so the uncommon nundro consists of 5 different practices. The first one is refuge. The second one, bodhicitta. In some traditions, they combine those two together, so then they refer to it as 4. But they're basically 5 things. Refuge, bodhicitta, then there's a purification, a vajrasattva purification. And then there are offerings. And then the last one is guru yoga. So those are, the 5. And so there's a vow that is taken as a part of this. So when we do the refuge vow, we take a vow to become a Buddhist, and that's kind of the key action that we take in order to become a Buddhist. There's nothing that says that you have to do that to become a Buddhist. It's just the tradition that is kind of the step that we take to formally become a Buddhist. And oftentimes we also do the Bodhisattva vow as a part of that. And I do those periodically for people interested in doing that. As a part of this commitment then is that you make a vow, and then it includes the uncommon nundro of doing contemplations on that, but there's not real specific guidelines in terms of how much of that you need to do or any of that kind of thing. But there's 3 ways that you can make this commitment or meet this commitment. One of them is through repetitions, and this is the one that you've probably heard of the most commonly, and that is by doing, of those 5, doing each one of those 100,000 times. 100,000 repetitions of each of those. Okay? That can take quite a while. Now, the most common way that that is done in the monastic tradition is that often after the young people have gone through the first part of their training, more or less roughly equivalent to getting through high school, and then they would often go on a 3-year retreat. And typically it would take them the first like 6 months, give or take, to do those, all of those 500,000, 500,000 different repetitions of those, including 100,000 prostrations. We'll talk about prostrations here in a little bit. So that's one of the ways, the most common way that that is done, and it is even said that if the Lama is not satisfied that you've done enough or done them properly, they may tell you to do it all over again. Okay? So there is that out there. But that's not the only way. It turns out that in the tradition there are 3 ways that this can be done. So that's just one of the 3. The second one is based on time. One of the lamas that we had a number of years ago, and he comes occasionally but not real often, is Anton Rinpoche. Comes here to Tucson and gives teachings. And he taught it based on the second one, which is time. You do it for a certain period of time. He said to do it for a year. Just make that your practice for 1 year. Don't do the other things, which can be complicated if you've already made a commitment to do something else. So then you're bound by trying to do 2 things at one time, which can take more time to do. But that's another one that it can be done on time. Now, there's nothing magical about 1 year. It can be done in shorter periods of time. I'll talk about a kind of a combination way of doing it in a moment, which has a shorter period of time, but then we do an addition on top of that. And the third one is signs. And the signs are kind of embodied in yourself, and so that's kind of you decide, okay, yes, I have mastered this particular one, I'll go on to the next one. I have mastered this one, I will go on. But it's good to talk with your Lama about why you feel like you have mastered it, so they can give you a hint whether they agree with you. Now, Lamas are not magical. They can't read your mind. They can't tell for sure whether you have. There may be some evidence based on your behavior and so forth, but they need to hear from you what you're experiencing as a part of that to be able to give you that for sure. So those are the 3: repetitions, time, and embodiment or signs from that. Now, the other thing that is oftentimes used in terms of terminology associated with this is the idea of completing Nundro. So, especially when you're doing numbers of those, and for lay practitioners, it often can take a long time, like 2-3 years. It took me, I think, 3 years to complete it all. And so, that can be a real challenge to get that done. But I don't really believe that it is something that you complete. That indicates that you do it for a period of time and you're done. You don't have to ever do it again. Well, look at those 5 things. Are you never going to take refuge again? Are you never going to do Vajrasattva purification practice? Are you never going to do Bodhisattva vow or Bodhisattva practice? It's Guru Yoga, offerings. Yeah, we do those all the time, in Tibetan Buddhism especially. There are also, parts of those are often included in other traditions as well. So it's not really about doing it for a specific time and ending it. So what I like to recommend is you do it for 3 to 6 months. You can do it for longer if you like, and that's always beneficial. But do it for at least 3 or 6 months. It's really your focus in terms of practice for that period of time. And then you commit to doing it every day thereafter. Okay? So you don't even commit to ending it. You commit to continuing to do that. Eventually you will have done that many in terms of number, or most likely you will have. So that's another alternative that you might consider about doing that. So I'm going to go a little bit further here. I'm watching the time to see how much time I have here. Talk a little bit about refuge. I'm not going to get into the details of that. We'll continue with that next time. But when we do refuge, there is one specific thing that we do as a part of that, which is visualizing the refuge tree. In the textbook, there's a little, very tiny picture of that. And over here, those of you online can't see the Tonka painting, but we have a large Tonka painting with the refuge tree on that as well. So I just wanted to explain the symbolism of the refuge tree here for you as a part of that. So in Tibetan Buddhism, there are refuge trees for different lineages and even sometimes variations within a lineage. So for example, this is a Nyingma refuge tree, which is the overall lineage that we follow. But within Nyingma, there can be slight variations of that. And so the Kagyu have their own, and then the various subcategories of Kagyu sometimes use different versions as well as a part of that. But the basic structure is the same in all of the cases. So in the center is a key figure of that lineage, oftentimes described as being the founder, or in some cases in other sub-branches, it may be a key figure a little bit further on. The founder of that particular subcategory or sub-lineage might be the central figure as a part of that. But in our lineage, the Nyingma stands for old school because it was the first one to go into Tibet and be established there in Tibet. And so the central figure is Padmasambhava, or Guru Rinpoche. And so if you look over here, you can see Guru Rinpoche. In this case, he's depicted as being in union with his consort, Yeshe Tsogyal, as a part of that. So he's the master that's credited, as I said, of bringing Buddhism to Tibet. And so it had already been there for some time. It's not like he was the one that actually originated bringing it there. In fact, Shintarikshita, who was also there at the same time, was actually there first and recommended that the king, King Tristan Detsen, invite Padmasambhava to come and help deal with some issues that they were having about trying to build a monastery, a Samye monastery there. Even for a couple hundred years prior to that, there were also things that had happened. I won't go through all that history, but where Buddhism was brought into Tibet as well. So within the picture itself, on Padmasambhava's right-hand side, so your left, are other Buddhas. Okay, not room for a lot, but there are usually 5 other Buddhas as part of that. And then on the other side, his left, are bodhisattvas. So we have the symbolism of the Buddhas here and the bodhisattvas over there. This one is 8 bodhisattvas and are Buddhas and 8 bodhisattvas. Okay. Sometimes they have 5, a group of 5 for the 5 Buddhas and 5 bodhisattvas. And so then behind him, I always thought, before I knew what it was, that it looked like a big hotel or something sitting back there. But it's actually a stack of Dharma texts. So the ends of them are facing forward. So they look kind of like windows or something in a building. But those are the Dharma texts. So those represent the teachings, okay, symbolically. And then below him are Dharma practitioners, called Dharmapalas. So these are the figures down here. And then there are also some of the Buddhist followers that are in there, including Shakyamuni Buddha is in the middle in this particular one. He's the one with his hand reaching down, touching the earth as a part of that. And so all of these are embedded in that part of it, but there's more. There's a bunch of figures up at the top as well. And in the center of those at the top, those represent the lineage, going back to the root source of the particular lineage. And so at the very top, you can maybe see is a dark blue figure there. That dark blue figure is Samittabhadra, who is the same blue figure as we see in this painting over here. Okay, but without a consort over here, he's with a consort. And then all around them in the sky are dakinis. Now, sometimes it's more than just dakinis, it's other practitioners. But we have the key lineage in the center part, and then we have other figures on either side, oftentimes the dakinis, but also sometimes there are other key figures in the lineage as a part of that. Now, dakini means is typically a female, mostly female. There can be male dakinis, but they're called sky dancers or messengers, and they help bring us the teachings, the information that we need to help understand the teachings. So together these are the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the other practitioners. So those together are what we call the community of support, or Sangha. And those collectively, those three, are called the three jewels. So when we take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. And we need all three of those to help master the practices and achieve liberation, enlightenment, and so forth. And so there's variations of that, and that's part of what we're going to talk about next time, and go into more detail about various forms of taking refuge, different levels of taking refuge, and so forth. And then we'll continue on into some of the other of the five basic practices. So for now then, we go back and recite the completion practices for today. So we go over to page 6 in the prayer book. And we first chant and sing Om Ahom Shri. Om Ahom Shri, 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 Om Ahom Shri. And then long life prayers, first for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. For this realm encircled by snow-covered mountains, you are the source of every benefit and bliss without exception. Tenzin Gyatso, you are one with Avalokiteshvara. May you remain steadfast until samsara's end. And His Holiness Khenchen Lama Rinpoche, in the Dharma Dhatu, appearing as Amitabha, in the Sambhogakaya form as Wisdom Buddha Mantrashri, Padmasambhava as Heart Sun Sangye Yeshe, incarnated as Padmadana Lingpa in previous life, and Palje Padorje in this lifetime. May your life be longer than the duration of samsara, so that all your virtuous intentions can be accomplished. Please give me your heart blessings, so that my mind is united with yours in the Buddha nature. So I pray. And then Khepa Dreamadawa, Imaho, you understand the noble objects of samsara, great teacher. You have realized the intent of the sacred Dharma Yogi Kempo. Your Dharma practices unification of the two. Kempo Dreamadawa, stainless moon, may you live long. Om Ahom Shri Ananta Benza Sawa Sevi Bala Hom Ah. Glorious, precious root Lama, sit on the lotus seat on the crown of my head. With your great kindness, please accept me. Please bestow the realizations of body, speech, and mind. In all the activities of the glorious Lama, may no wrong view arise even for a moment. By the devotion of seeing whatever he or she does as perfect, may the blessing of the Lama enter my mind. Throughout the succession of my lives, from the perfect Lamas, may I never be separated, and enjoying the glory of the Dharma, perfect all the qualities of the stages in the past, and swiftly attain the stage of Vajradhara. The Lamas who have become the glory of the Dharma, may their lives be stable. May the land be entirely filled with doctrine holders. May the wealth and power of the patrons of the doctrine increase. And may the auspiciousness of the doctrine remain forever. Bodhicitta, the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise, where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. Om Mani Padme Hum Shri, Om Mani Padme Hum Shri, Om Mani Padme Hum Shri. I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you. By way of announcements, we are starting our Essentials 7 class, which is the beginning of the Dzogchen tradition, this afternoon at 1 o'clock here. And it's also available online, so you can take the class online for those of you who are not able to attend here locally. And also, we have our Sunday practice. We'll continue that. We have a Wednesday practice. And so Wednesday practice, we will be doing the Guru Yoga with the Tok this week. And so please join us for that. That's Wednesday at 6 o'clock, Daylight Saving Time or Tucson time that we have here. And so those are the main things going on right now. And so please abide softly and deeply in pure awareness, loving kindness, and compassion for all sentient beings, always and always. Thank you.
Thank you, Kendall.